Hello, everyone. For the rest of our time together this afternoon, we want to think through all the presenters that we've heard. I know there are some questions that I'm sure are going to come up because on Twitter, since that's what's fresh in your mind. But keep on. We can't encourage you too much to participate in the chat room, and I'm glad so many of you are still with us. Before we get going on the discussion, I did just want to take an opportunity to say thanks to some folks, introduce our reactors. We have a couple of polls ourselves, so assuming you're not polled out yet, and then we'll turn to some discussion questions that we have. But Stephen, first of all, thanks to you, our moderator, did a great job. And we have some behind-the-scenes folks. Joanne Starks, for example, organized this panel for this afternoon. So she's been working with her friends in Canada and Cami and Madeline for literally months. And thanks, of course, to the presenters. I think we all have a lot of tips, and I know there's been tons of little URLs and resources there in the chat that we've got a lot to put into action and help us figure out how to measure the impact of that action. I did, just in case some people joined us later in the afternoon, I thought perhaps the presenters could briefly say hello, so people who may not have listened in earlier will recognize your voices. Cami Hoysa, are you still with us on the line? You just kind of...
I sure am. Yep, I'm here. Hi,
okay.
This is Cami.
And Linda Nicholson?
Yep, hi, it's Linda.
And Linda, are you there on the line by yourself, or did Sophia and Davud, were they able to stay?
I'm also here. Davud is also still here.
Okay, so that's Davud, folks. Madeline, you want to just say hey in case we did get someone in the last 2 seconds?
I'm here, Madeline Sklar. Thank you.
Okay. So I think if you have been with us all afternoon, you've heard those, but there are some new voices that are going to join us. We've invited a few people to the discussion. Some of them you're going to recognize from the chat, but for example, here's Jess Chaikin. Hi, guys. And a new voice for you is Anna Norveg. Were you able to join us, Anna?
Hello. This
Great,
is Anna.
And Phil Recajo is online with us.
Hello, this is Phil.
Okay, Phil, I think you need to maybe turn off your computer speakers. If you look up at the top, see meeting layouts, pods, audio, and there's a little...
I got it.
Thanks. And I don't think Pam Williamson was able to join us. But she's there. So you can see it's a pretty illustrious panel. Jess is calling in from the National Rehabilitation Information Center. Most of you, if you know that, know it as NARIC, which is housed at High Tech Services. Anna Norveg is with the Rusk Rehab at the New York University Langone Medical Center. Phil Recajo is calling in from the Rehabilitation Engineering Research Center. Neidler calls those projects RERCs. And this one focuses on technologies for successful aging with disability at the University of Southern California, is where it's located. I mean, I think it's probably they look at successful aging everywhere. But Pam has been with us earlier this week, so we did have representation from the Southeast Americans with Disabilities Act Center at the Burton Blatt Institute housed in Syracuse University. So that's our community. It's definitely a poll day today at the KT conference, so we are going to just recap some of your experiences. I know we've talked about a lot of tools, and we were just wondering which ones you all do use. You can see you can, we recognize that as best practice you're probably using more than one, so go ahead and select all that apply there. Whether it be Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, or other. There's no dearth of them as we now know, or probably knew all along for some of you. Okay, so Facebook is definitely the winner. That's interesting because the question did ask if you were currently using it for communicating science, and I know there's been some discussion in the chat there as to the challenges of maybe using Facebook if the goal is something sort of technical and serious given all the different ways that other people use Facebook. Twitter, obviously, we know now, and as I say, some of you knew all along. There's great ways to use Twitter for communicating science. And then next is YouTube and Instagram. So right there, right in the order of how we presented these, are in the order of prevalence. Okay, so another big point we've learned today is that what comes first is your objective, not your platform, and part of that objective is who are you trying to reach. So what audiences do you all primarily, you can hear me texting you all, do you primarily try to reach with your professional use of social media? So no one's saying they don't use it at all, which I guess makes sense given that you logged on to a conference like this. I'm going to let you all do the poll for a second here while we take it all in. Okay, looks like it's pretty stable there. Wow, so we have a tie. Other researchers and clinicians. Interesting. And looking in the chat, all of the above. Yeah, you could have done all of the above. Media, INR. Jess, what is INR? Information and referral, I guess, pros?
Yeah, information and referral, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Got it. And then, again, people with disabilities and or their families is our winner here. Well, that is great. And businesses are running far behind. Interesting. Okay. Okay, so just as a last poll before we get going on our discussion, this one's for everybody. We're wondering about how important our own use, right, KTDRR's own use of social media was in letting people know about this conference as compared to other things that we did to get the word out. So here's a little mini case study, I guess, of if you were going to do an online conference and we're hoping people were going to show up, would you want to reach out via a newsletter, via social media, via coworker invitation from another individual, a website homepage, or are people searching us out on an online search? So it looks like we have a lot of newsletter subscribers here. Interesting. Good. Okay.
Email, where does email fit in?
I think that's the newsletter.
I guess invitation from another individual, or if it wasn't, if we do send out our newsletter via email, so it depends, I guess, on the nature of that email. And I suspect too, I mean, the poll doesn't really capture this, but probably some of you heard about it in more than one way. I think sometimes I worry that we kind of put out too much stuff and people are sick of hearing us, but and just, you know, hearkening back to Linda's presentation on the importance of networking, it did see the importance there, the most prevalent being coworker invitation from another individual. And going back to our audience's question, I was looking at the poll results here. It looks like, right, Marta Garcia uses social media to try to reach the Spanish language disability community in particular, not just people with disabilities in general. Okay, so let's go ahead and clear the polls. So just to give us some kind of kickoff things to talk about, these questions were circulated ahead of time to our reactors. Where we got these, as you may remember, when you registered for the conference, we ask people if they have specific questions, and then we, you know, our staff takes all of those questions and we do kind of a content analysis of them and try to think through, all right, you know, if we can't answer every single question here, but what are the general themes that people are bringing up, and what are ways that we can come up with synthetic questions that might help address a good swath of these. So one general theme of the questions that people had was increasing engagement with social media. How can I increase engagement with social media in terms of traffic or getting more product downloads or getting more comments on my stuff, the content that I'm putting out on social media, when it comes out to either getting more of that or getting it, maybe a more substantive kind of engagement or comment, or having it happen more frequently. So, we really, anybody who wants to address this, did any of our reactors think through, maybe just Chaikin, I know you have to think about this with NARIC. Do you have any kind of tips for the trade?
Well, yeah, definitely. I was jotting notes while listening and typing and doing everything else. I really liked the idea of different tones for different channels. It's as important to know where your patrons are, where your audience is, and to know how they're talking. What's the language they're using? What items are they sharing? And gearing your message with the same tone. And the second question there, how important is advanced planning? We have this idea that social media is sort of on the fly and ad hoc, but it doesn't have to be. It really doesn't. And I've found it to be incredibly helpful the last few months. We've been charting our editorial calendar out about 8 to 10 weeks. And it gives us a great advanced picture of where we're going to take our own discussions, but it still leaves us the flexibility to be able to respond as topics trend or as events happen. And to someone's question about how do you do all of the social media when you also have to do things like writing proposals or being a clinician, using a calendar like that is so helpful to manage that time effectively. And if you can develop an effective schedule, an effective message, I think you'll increase the engagement rates, especially if you know what your patrons are talking about, how they're talking about it, what types of things they're already sharing. And using the calendar and that together, you'll really craft a good message.
Okay. Phil? Or
Yes. So I'm looking at this question, and one thing that really comes to my mind is increasing engagement. And I think in order to do that, we need to have basically buy-in from the target groups. And I think that requires really being very active in the community, whatever that community may be. And one thing that we've tried, and I think since 2008, and there's been a lot of advancement and changes in social media. We've engaged our peers, people that can connect with the group, and they become very much involved in this community. But they needed to have, they needed to be identified as one of their own. So, for example, it would be difficult for me to try to engage folks in social media if I'm coming in as a researcher, sort of removed from the community. And I think that's one of the key aspects of this. It really takes effort and sustained effort to gain engagement, to increase this engagement. And it's certainly important to have advanced planning. And things change from 1 year to the next in terms of how best to plan for this, for having an effective social media strategy. When we started with this in 2008, I believe Instagram was not very popular, and I think now, especially with our population here with young individuals with spinal cord injury, I think that the more cutting edge or newer social media platform seems to have a greater effect. We're still trying to figure out a good way to measure how well we're doing because, we have a population that, mainly bilingual, and the impact of our social media is a bit, it's a bit hard for us to gauge that. And the only way we can really get a good sense of that is how much feedback, direct feedback and personal feedback we get from our the people that are connect to this social media. So there's certainly a lot of challenges that is faced with trying to increase engagement in social media, at least from our vantage point of view. So.
Sure. And I want to flip the slide back here so people can see where y'all are coming from. So when you're talking about engaging your community, is it a community specific to aging, or how would you bound the population that you're talking about?
Yeah, I actually have to make a correction to this. We were doing technologies for successful aging, but I'm actually more involved in the spinal cord injury model systems these days instead of aging with disability broadly. So it's much more focused on aging with spinal cord injury, and specifically wheelchair users who are aging with spinal cord injury, who tend to be more, at this point, younger and more connected to social media platforms, because everybody has a cell phone and they're able to check their Facebook, Instagram, and text. So just to clarify that point here, this is, I don't know where this was about 4 years ago that our center. It's no longer. It's actually no longer. We're no longer involved in this center.
Sure. And for the people who are on the participating who are not NIDLR grantees, can you just briefly explain what a model systems is?
It's one of 14 in the country who are basically, it was mandated by the federal government to serve to perform research and collect data on the prevalence and long-term outcomes of people with spinal cord injury across the nation. So we're tasked to gather information on the number of individuals who sustain spinal cord injury in our region, as well as performing research to better understand long-term outcomes in people with spinal cord injury. So we're the Southern California Spinal Cord Injury Model Systems, and we're one of 14 in the country.
Great, thanks, Phil. And for our participants, just so you're aware, if you're interested especially in the model systems and knowledge translation issues related to that, our organization, the American Institutes for Research, also holds our agency, NIDLR's KT Center, that reaches out specifically to those model systems, and their website is msktc.org. So I'm looking, Anna Norwig, you're also coming from a medical setting. Can you, are you working also especially with spinal cord injury at Rusk Rehab, or do you have a different kind of focus for the work that you do?
So my area of research is people who have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, the COPD. So they're an older population, and my research currently does not use social media, but I'm very interested to
use this particular resource in future research. So my stage is really sort of deciding how to best utilize social media for future research, with some of the issues being pulmonary rehabilitation, for example, and I won't spend very long discussing this, but there is a lot of strong evidence supporting the value of pulmonary rehab, and so there is certainly a real need for disseminating that knowledge to people who can most benefit from it, which are the patients and family members of people who have COPD. And just some of the thoughts I have in being a part of this conference today, I think that perhaps Facebook might be a better platform to use. From what I understand, that is a platform that people are using more, people who are older in age. And so that is a platform that I would perhaps lean towards. I'm exploring different ideas, perhaps I'm very interested in creating a collaborative community and cultivating important research networks. There's some interests that I have as a researcher. I'm also very interested in patient-centered types of research, and in other words, I believe that patients should be really engaged and part of the research process as important and equal stakeholders. So I think that there is definitely much more potential with this type of resource available, and I feel like I'm just trying to catch up in some ways to bring this resource to my research.
Great, thanks, Anna. So one reason why I wanted to get a real in-depth sense of, for the reactors, the audiences that you're working with, I'm wondering, Linda and or Dawood, looking at Jeff Chaikin's comment here, one way we track engagement is interaction, not just shares or clicks, but engaging us in conversation through comments, questions posted to our Facebook or our blog, requesting materials. I mean, some of the, like measuring your impact, it's a qualitative difference, right? We can't just be counting things, but it matters. I'm looking here, at the intensity or the substance. So is it the case, have you found in your work with the networks and your communities of practice that you're needing to balance face-to-face communication and relationship building with what happens in the digital world? Or, how do they feed into each other, or is it multi-channel? How has that worked for you, or has face-to-face not been a part of it at all?
Hi there, it's Sophia and Linda here. I think this is an excellent question you raise. I think that absolutely as we go forward, we want to increase and strengthen our ability to reach folks face-to-face, because really, truly, in the face of social media, the presence of social media, there is definitely a place for social media in terms of generating awareness, creating awareness, sharing resources, and so on. But at the same time, we do recognize the importance of peer-to-peer, person-to-person interaction, and hence when we have in-person workshops, we do provide also an option to join remotely, say through Adobe Connect, for example. But there are those opportunities for the in-person interactions that we want to, as we go forward, because we're at a critical stage now with starting to set up some of these communities of practice, to be able to create more opportunities for these in-person interactions.
Great, thanks, Sophia. So looking at Radha's comment, plan to use diverse methods for diverse audiences is key, I think. My father would want a detailed description of what I'm trying to say, but my teen kid will look for keywords and not necessarily sentences. So if we're thinking through outreach in general, right? So like what Kami, I really liked it when she was talking about picking your tactic after your objective. So if your objective is to reach someone, in this case with, say, a research finding, obviously we've talked about multi-channel within the realm of social media, but social media itself is just one way. And Kami, you had ways of analyzing the quality of, you were talking about new research, analyzing the textual content of what happens on social media. Do you, or Madeline, do you have ways of analyzing the social media outreach as compared to traditional outreach, whether it be, you know, cost or how fast it is?
Yes.
Or go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, I do. This is Kami. So we have done a lot of that kind of analysis. Certainly, you got to be careful not to get to what you call, like, you know, the cost what it would cost to run it here versus there. But there is a cost of acquisition and marketing that they talk about in marketing, where you pay a certain amount of money to acquire a lead. And I know you guys aren't doing leads, but you can adapt that to say, okay, it costs us this much time, effort, and energy to get this many people into our program or through whatever your outcome goal is. And then you can compare that to what you do in social media. And there's no fancy tool for that. That is just something that you're going to have to code as it comes in. And I would say that, you know, if you're asking people where they heard about you, that's one good way to start. It's where did you hear about this? And you can get that put into a sort of a format so that you ask it on a regular basis and you collect it from everyone. So there's that. And then the second thing is that for engagement online and those kinds of things, those are different, but outcomes really usually are a specific thing. You want to drive people to the same outcome that you would have them do, whether they were coming through social media or the door of the telephone or the door of the email list or the door of, you know, somebody talking to them. You know, probably it's going to be your website. Yeah. And so that's when something like Google Analytics becomes really, really important. And Google Analytics is a free tool, and I have it in my toolkit that I have tried to get out to everyone. I just tweeted it as well so that you can get to it from there too. But the toolkit really will outline that, some of those tools that you can use. But Google Analytics becomes hugely important because you can see where people came from to your website. And that's hopefully something that most websites these days have, but I've unfortunately found that they don't. So you may want to ask if you can figure that out with your whoever's running your website or wherever you're downloading things or wherever people are coming to find out.
Okay, thanks. And getting back to, excuse me, getting back maybe to Twitter, or some of the questions that we had from, which aren't on the slide, but are extending these questions, thinking about this concept of audience. We do get some international presence in our registration. So are any of these tools, whether it be Twitter or others, more or less suited to international outreach? Just throw it out there for whoever wants to answer. Or are there ones that are, you know, really great for a certain part of the world that we haven't talked about?
Well, this is Madeline. Twitter has been really great for me with international, just because you can reach so many people everywhere on there. When I'm running my Twitter chats, I get people everywhere in the world that comes on it, even if it's 3 a.m. for them. Just to frame it for Twitter, like the reach that you can have on there and the connecting with people from everywhere.
Hey, this is
And does
Jess.
Twitter itself translate, or how does that work?
It does. When you're on mobile, I've seen it translate on there. When I get a tweet from somebody and it's in a different language, it will automatically translate it. I haven't noticed it on the browser. Tammy, have you noticed if it does it on the browser? Because I haven't seen it on there.
No, I mean, unless you're using Google Translate, which of course you can put as a plug-in to your website, it's definitely not doing that. And there's a few, and I, off the top of my head, I'd have a hard time. I could tell you because I have them somewhere squirreled away. But as far as monitoring tools for different pieces, there are monitoring tools that specifically specialize in multiple languages and so forth, and also with monitoring in other languages. But I will tell you, they are not cheap. They are not cheap. So then it becomes a cost issue. So, if you're willing to pay $500 a month and up, those kinds of tools do exist.
Great, thanks. So we're getting some comments and questions here in the chat. It's very kind of meta comment because we've been live tweeting this conference. So Carol Zangari is wondering, since we're talking about Twitter, can you talk a little about the ethics of live tweeting at professional conferences and workshops? And Judy Zazula kind of asks in particular, what about intellectual property? Can Twitter PNGs be used on our organization's website, Facebook newsletter? Can they be considered public domain? So maybe, I guess they are distinct. So can we talk a little?
Sorry, I think this is a really good question. It's one that we've, so this is Sophia speaking, at the Ministry of Education, being a government organization, we of course have a lot of considerations around privacy. I think, and having hosted some conferences like our Ontario Educational Research Symposium, for example, or recently in the summer an information session for our stakeholders, one of our partners had asked, can we live tweet at the event? And we had a discussion here amongst ourselves, and we said, you know what? We decided yes. And the reason being, there are the considerations for live tweeting. I think what's happening now is we are moving towards saying yes for that. We also, I think, live in a world where we kind of recognize anything can be photographed at any time and posted anywhere. Like there's really, I want to say no way to control that. And I think that, we've embraced it in a lot of ways, even though there's still a little bit of hesitation, concerns around the ethics. And the question around, about, I think it was about intellectual property. I think when it comes to that, we started considering that in terms of our slides. So a couple of things. So one, we ask at the beginning of a session, we would say, if you are tweeting, please use the hashtag for in our case, it would be at Ontario EDU or at NAIR, to acknowledge that, this is happening at this session, or perhaps if the speaker is also sharing their Twitter handle, that you may use that in your tweets. But also when it comes to the slides, if it's something like, for instance, our model, right, we may wish to label it with, crediting who the authors are, or if there's other information to ensure that the slide contains that. So if it's, for example, Nicholson 2016, that's on that slide, recognizing that people at any time can take a photo of it, of that slide, and immediately be tweeting it to everyone. It's in the public domain. So we live in a time and an age where these are definite considerations.
Definitely, thanks. And that's interesting. So I hadn't thought about, the way we can use a URL these days as attribution, and that's been recognized by style guides. I'm sure they're rewriting them now as we speak to encompass what you just described, using a hashtag as a method of attribution for intellectual property. So Jess has pointed to us to a resource from the World Intellectual Property Organization that discusses that issue. Madeline is pointing out, Joanne, people do share photos on Twitter that they do not have copyright to. So going back up here in the chat, this is really a perennial question, response that we get ourselves, our own center, when we reach out to NIRLA grantees and ask them about knowledge translation in general. they'll say, well, we don't have enough time, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough staff. So Peg similarly is pointing out, I'm doing well if I can finish the research and publish the results somewhere, anywhere. Who has time to engage? The calendar technique doesn't work if you don't have money to hire enough support staff. So one question that we actually didn't get to on Monday was, some of you may be familiar with it's a project management kind of aphorism that you pick two, right? Fast, good, cheap. You can't have all three. So let's just say we want to go for inexpensive, right? And we're okay with adequate, or, which of these tools do you think are more or less labor intensive, let's say? And maybe Tammy, could you speak to that?
Yeah, I could. So first of all, I'll say that a calendar doesn't have to be super sophisticated. And I'm also really busy, and I don't have anybody tweeting for our company. So we have I have just brutal days sometimes. And so I get up early in the morning. I do not tweet 50 to 100 times a day. I love that Madeline does. There's no way. I read a little bit. I collect things, and I schedule them for the week. I schedule them out. And if you have a tool like Hootsuite or like Buffer, which I actually really like, I like Buffer, and then I engage actually just in real time. But Hootsuite will let you engage like on your own time too. So time shifting becomes hugely important. And so you can actually get an entire week of tweets and so on, and Facebook posts and everything queued up in, I'd say, 30 to 45 minutes, or 30 minutes even, if you're really shy on time and you only want to put, maybe a dozen total for the whole week. So yeah, I mean, you do not have to have a sophisticated operation to make this work with something like a Hootsuite or like Buffer, and both of those have a free option for both. So.
Great, thanks, Tammy.
And this is Madeline, and I see that Jessica just pointed out in the chat here that CoSchedule is a good one as well, and they have lots of great free tools that they're always sharing, and plus theirs is really good as well for scheduling.
Oh, I love their headline generator.
Okay, so we're getting pretty close to the top of the hour, and I need to leave a little bit of time for some housekeeping. Is there anything else, tips that people on the phone have for those who are listening, some final words of wisdom? I guess we've had enough words of wisdom then. Okay. So I guess we are going to wrap things up. I just wanted, of course, to thank everyone for so many thoughtful presentations, tweets, comments, discussion. We hope today's sessions, as well as those earlier in the week, have been useful to you, and that you can really take what you've learned and apply it to your work. Some people have been wondering about how to access different products that have been presented. So if you did miss some of the conference or want to see the slides, the presentations are available for download on our website, ktdrr.org. If someone could post the link there in the chat, Joanne, if you could put the link to the expo there, that would be great. And I also wanted to point out, some of you are saying, oh, is it going to be archived? I missed a part of it. Could you let us know? The best way to find out about that, and there's other things that we do as well that may be of interest to you, is if you, while you're on ktdrr.org, if you go ahead and sign up for our newsletter, then it'll be in the newsletter when the conference archive is ready in early 2017. And you also won't miss things that, frankly, we may not have even planned yet that will be, though, of interest to you. I can tell you that we will do this again next year. This is our 4th year in a row. Typically, we do it this last week of October on Monday, Wednesday, Friday from noon to 4 Eastern, 1 to 5 Eastern. And that has seemed to work well and not conflict with a lot of other conferences that others that y'all tend to attend. But you know, we're the Center on Knowledge Translation for Disability and Rehabilitation Research, so we take knowledge translation really seriously. We're not going to plan exactly when it is or what it's going to be about until we hear from you.